gentlemen, welcome to the Deutsche Welle Freedom of Speech Award 2018. And please give a warm welcome to our host, Edith Kimani.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here. I'd like us to begin with a small exercise, and if you'll indulge me, please close your eyes. If it makes you uncomfortable, you can look down, take a deep breath before that, if it helps. Now, I want you to think about one of your favorite family traditions. It can be anything. It just has to be your favorite one. I'm thinking of Christmas in my grandmother's small kitchen. We're laughing with my cousins and we're talking about being young, reminiscing about childhood. And of course, there's the food during Christmas. Now, think about all the people you see there in your picture. Maybe it's your children, perhaps it's your brothers or your sisters, or that friend who's now become family. Or maybe it's just your husband or your wife. Now I want you to take yourself out of that scene. You're no longer there. And imagine not being able to share in this favorite moment for up to 10 years because you're in prison. You've not harmed anyone, in fact, quite the opposite. Can you imagine being in a jail cell for 10 years just for doing your job? You can open your eyes now. Thank you. That picture that I've just painted is actually the reality for many journalists around the world. These are our friends, our husbands, our children, and for most of us in this room, they're our colleagues, taken out of society for challenging those who are in power. Tonight, we're here to honor those people, and specifically one journalist who's tasted that reality. Welcome to DW's Freedom of Speech Award 2018. Now, this award was first launched in 2015 to honor journalists that go above and beyond in their pursuit of the right to express free expression. And it's important to note that the first recipient ever of this award, he's a Saudi blogger, Raif Badawi, has been in jail for 5 years. As we speak now, he's in a prison cell, and he's going to be in that cell for 5 more years in order to complete his prison term. And as a journalist himself, our Director General here, Peter Limburg, has spoken very passionately on this issue, saying, quote, "It's the right of everybody on this planet to speak their minds freely without fear of harassment or arrest." And he will be the one to kick off this program by allowing me to ask him a few questions. Ladies and gentlemen, Director General Mr. Peter Limburg. So I suppose the most obvious question is, why is this award so important?
I think it is important. When we listen to you, we know why it's important, because there's so many journalists, academics, people who are in a civil society who are just telling the truth or telling their opinion, and suddenly they vanish, they're in jail, or even harder, they get tortured or killed. So I think we as Deutsche Welle have an obligation to do something, and we cannot get people out of prison, but we can highlight the situation of media around the world. And I think when you look at the award winners, in the last years, we are around the world, and press freedom is in danger, not only in countries where you have dictatorships, but also in democracies, as we see around the world. So I think it is quite good to have such an award. This is why we're doing it.
Right, and it's been going on for 3 years now. I mentioned it started in 2015. What brought about this idea? How did you come up with the idea of having an award?
Well, we had several awards in the past, and then we said, let's really focus on one award and do everything what we can do. So put in media power and put in all our marketing possibilities in this award and make him known. And so it has a real effect, and I'm happy that a lot of people now also discuss about this award and talk about the award. I think this is something which is important, and and you can now always have different opinions on the award winners. Correct. This is, I think, very, very important. But now I think this award in the last 4 years has become a relevant award for freedom of speech.
Can you tell us some of the ways that DW is promoting freedom of speech?
We do this basically every day in our programs in 30 languages, and we are an advocate for freedom of speech. We give platforms for people who normally might not have the possibility to give their opinion, and we have a special online platform, DW Freedom, which is also, I think, a contribution to this, that we always can highlight where there are problems concerning freedom of speech. So it's our daily business.
Thank you very much for opening up this session with your very honest and candid answers.
Thank you.
Director General, Mr. Peter Limburg. Now, I know I started this program off on a very somber note, but I think it's important to have perspective. But we're also celebrating these journalists who put their lives sometimes at risk, as we've heard, in order to make sure that the job gets done. And I just want to lighten the mood a little bit now. I'm going to invite someone who's rather special. He's a Sierra Leonean-German singer. He's also a songwriter, a music producer, and a filmmaker. So he's quite a jack of many trades. And he's been writing his own songs since he was 12 years old. And he primarily sings about courage, euphoria, and sensuality. Please help me welcome Patrice Babatunde Bart Williams.
Thank you. This is after the guns are drawn, after dusk has turned to dawn. This is the calm after the storm. It's a brand new morn. This is after you beat your chest and you talk how you're the baddest and the biggest, yeah. After we put it out to the test and we kill the rotten, leave the rest. This is after the gloves come off, after the puppy show the bluff. When we check what we are made of, the fabric and the color, only what make me can break me, only what make me, and you're not my maker, only what make me can break me. Only what make me, and you're not my maker. My pain's consuming me from the inside. The line got crossed so far it's out of sight, yeah. Delusions rule my mind. Should I just leave it all behind, or should I give it some more time? It looks so foolish to be trying to keep something alive that has lost its will to live. There's so much more I want to give. Only what makes me can break me. Only what makes me, and you're not my maker. This is the moment of truth. We have things to lose. I have been wrongly accused, and soon you will make your move. You're about to become old news. If God is hating me, I wasn't built to lose. I don't need only what makes me can break me. Only what makes me, and you're not my maker. Only what makes me can break me. Only what makes me, and you're not my maker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Babatunde, but really his name is just Patrice, at least that's his stage name. Feel free to check out his work on YouTube. Now, this year's winner of the Freedom of Speech Award is a courageous advocate of freedom of speech, and it's an honor to have you here with us, Mr. Sadegh Zibakalam, and we'll be hearing more about him later, but he's also joined by his daughter, the gorgeous Layla Zibakalam, and we're going to find out more about Mr. Sadegh in a short video that's just about to play now.
At the end of December 2017, Iran saw its biggest anti-government demonstrations in almost a decade. The protests quickly spread to dozens of cities and towns across the country. Just days after the unrest erupted, Sadegh Zibakalam gave an interview to DW Farsi. He characterized the demonstrators as young people disappointed with the entire political system, and said more than 2/3 of people are dissatisfied with the Islamic Republic. Those views didn't go down well with the Iranian authorities. They accused Zibakalam of spreading false information and propaganda against the Islamic Republic. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison and barred from social media for 2 years.
Why should I be punished? Someone has expressed an opinion which is not compatible, which is not in line, which is not in accordance with the government opinion.
It's not the first time the academic has received a jail sentence for speaking his mind. He's become a well-known figure in Iran for challenging the government narrative on many sensitive issues, from the country's nuclear program to foreign policy. And in spite of the banning of social media platform Telegram by the Iranian authorities, Zibakalam has a large online audience of more than 800,000 followers. Some Iranian activists in exile argue that Zibakalam is not aggressive enough in his demands for change, forgetting the fact that he is trying to change the system from within, which is not without personal risk.
It is a little trite to criticize from abroad, from a position of comfort, that someone is too soft, by people who cannot be prosecuted because they live in free and constitutional states and not in Iran. Therefore, I'm very much in favor of putting the focus on those who are leading the struggle inside Iran, and that is not the opposition in exile.
Zibakalam has vowed to keep on expressing his opinions, despite the official threats against him.
My hope for Iran's future is genuine. I sincerely hope. I'm not a daydreamer. It's not just wishful thinking. Because I believe that democracy will eventually prevail in Iran.
Well, that was just a little bit about Mr. Zibakalam. I now want to invite Mr. Reinhard Baumgarten. He has worked himself as a journalist for many years and is actually very well acquainted with difficult working conditions, having worked as a foreign correspondent since 2011, first in Cairo and then in Tehran, and since 2011 he's been working from Istanbul. And I think it's rather fitting that he should be the one to tell you more about our award recipient this evening. Welcome, Mr. Baumgarten.
Thank you very much. You never know. Dear Professor Zibakalam, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, it's an honor to be able to stand before you today to recognize Professor Sadegh Zibakalam with the 2018 Deutsche Welle Freedom of Speech Award. I am not sure if this is a coincidence or a destiny, but I have to mention that the good professor is also celebrating his 70th birthday today. Tabrik migam aroye Dr. Zibakalam. Happy birthday. I met Professor Zibakalam personally for the first time in the winter of 2011 when I visited him at his house with an Iranian friend for an interview. It was a typical winter day in Tehran, cold and wet. Winter in Tehran can be quite nasty. But luckily for me, the living room in Zibakalam residence was warm, and I was welcomed with hot tea and delicious pastries. We conducted the interview, and I listened intently before the most unexpected thing happened. I nodded off. Of course, my short nap was not the fault of the professor. He is not only an eloquent speaker, but also someone who can summarize complicated issues while staying on topic. I honestly don't know if the professor noticed that I had dozed off, but please, dear professor, accept this belated apology. In the end, the interview was recorded, translated, and presented to the public. Nothing was lost. I reported from and about Iran as a foreign correspondent for 6 years. And I had the privilege of interviewing Professor Zibakalam regularly during this time. He taught me a lot. And when we spoke about him at my office, we referred to him as Professor Schönrede, which is the German translation of his Persian last name. Schönrede in English, in German, it means in English, beautiful speech. To quote a Persian proverb, Divar mush darad, mush ham gush darad. That's why we used Professor Schönrede. Walls have mice and mice have ears. In Iran, surveillance is a prominent topic, really prominent. The Islamic Republic of Iran, ladies and gentlemen, is a difficult environment, not only for us reporters. This is due to the country's ever-present censorship, which, according to the Iranian constitution, should not even exist. Article 24 of the constitution states that publications and the press have freedom of expression. However, this article also states that such freedoms exist unless they infringe on the basic tenets of Islam or the public interests. It is this unless that underlines the current situation in Iran. The power dynamic in Iran is very complicated. Who takes certain positions? Who opposes whom? What interests are behind political decisions, and who, in the end, selfishly reap the profits from all those decisions? The current political climate, especially when it comes to discussions of the Iran nuclear agreement, is easily painted in black and white. Hardliners in Tehran and in the US continue to demonize the other side while shutting out any option for dialogue and compromise. So, who is then in the position to assist us towards a greater understanding of these issues, especially on the global political stage? This is where people like Professor Zibakalam step in. He understands the political and socio-economic situation on the ground in Iran and uses this knowledge to serve his people and his country. He understands this system as it is a system he is part of. It is a role he has held for 4 decades, a thankless role that has led him to be attacked by both the supporters of the Islamic Republic and those who oppose it, whether they live inside Iran or outside of the country. There are many educated people in Iran who express themselves very well, but openly talking about the burning issues in the country can be risky, quite risky. We saw it in the video. Professor Zibakalam feels the need to express himself. He took a stand, which means he is sticking his finger into open wounds. He has a history of addressing his country's growing drug problem, its high rate of poverty, the impoverishment of large sections of the population, empty mosques, increasing unemployment. All of this has led to a growing resentment, especially among young people, and to an expanding disinterest in the supposed successes of the revolution. He angered many by questioning the scope of the Iranian nuclear program and the billions and billions of dollars it has cost the regime, while not bringing about the economic and social benefits that were promised. Such stances do not sit well with the people who hold positions of power in Iran, people who refuse to reflect on their own failures and too often blame foreign forces for what ails their country. 2 years ago, Professor Zibakalam refused to step on an Israeli and US flag placed in the entrance area of a building in the eastern Iranian city of Mashhad. He chose instead to walk around the flags. You can see this on YouTube. It's very impressive. He even climbed over it. Earlier this year, he agreed to speak to Deutsche Welle, to Deutsche Welle's Persian language department, about the existing domestic political and social realities that led to recent nationwide protests. Shortly after, Professor Zibakalam was arrested and sentenced to 18 months in prison by a revolutionary court. Through his thoughts and deeds, Zibakalam persists. The support he receives from the populace is evident through his hundreds of thousands of followers on Facebook, Instagram, and the popular messenger service Telegram. Yet, he makes no secret of his closeness to President Hassan Rouhani. On the contrary, he advocates for reforming Iran's current ruling system instead of abolishing it outright. He believes in the democratic capacity of his country and even stated in an interview that he would take up arms to defend his country if necessary. This stance is predicated on his belief that any violent effort to abolish the current political system in Iran would lead to a conflict much worse than the current civil war in Syria. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a long legacy of free speech and free expression in these hallowed halls of the former German Bundestag, where brilliant debates over press freedom and free expression were held when we were a young republic. We here in Germany and in Western countries believe that the fortunes that these values have brought to society remains something that we need to treasure and are values that we need to encourage in countries like Iran. But freedom does not match the current reality in Iran. And this reality will remain, or it will even worsen, if the politics of the current President Donald Trump, US President Donald Trump, and his hawkish supporters continue to drive Iran into financial ruin. Unfortunately, such entrenched anti-Americanism among Iranian hardliners has become a pillar of their political ideology. This is a reality that Professor Zibakalam has been pointing out for decades. And he has consistently been one of the few Iranian intellectuals to do so. At a podium discussion, Zibakalam even asked who it was that granted Iran the contract to destroy the state of Israel. با یک گل بهار نمی شود. This is a Persian proverb. It says, one rose does not spring make. Professor Zibakalam is not the only one who speaks out in Iran. He is one of a growing number of people in the Islamic Republic who utilize their right to free speech and free expression. Those who view such people as enemies of the state will never comprehend the countless seeds that have been planted by civil society in their struggle for greater freedoms. I would like to finish my speech with one last Iranian Persian proverb. ما همیشه زیر ابر نمیماند. The moon doesn't always stay behind the clouds. May this presentation of Deutsche Welle's Freedom of Speech Award to Professor Sadegh Zibakalam strengthen and encourage all those who stand up for freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and free media in Iran and around the world. I thank you for your patience and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baumgarten. I'd actually like you to please remain where you are on the stage. And I would like to invite Mr. Limburg back onto the stage to officially present the award to Mr. Zibakalam.
I was hoping that the General Director's speech to be longer and everyone else would speak long, because I'm afraid my speech is a bit too long. And anyway, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Director General Limburg, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I would like to begin by thanking Deutsche Welle for choosing me to receive this honorable Freedom of Speech Award. However, to be sure, I think there are dozens other Iranians who qualify far more than I do to receive this award. I have not spent a day in prison in Islamic Iran for my beliefs, but there are many Iranian writers, journalists, lawyers, women, and human rights activists, trade unionists, students, artists, dissident and opposition figures, religious thinkers, including Sunnis, Baha'is, Christian activists, and even dervishes and Sufi mystics who have spent many years behind the bars. I believe that they would have presented a far more suitable choice to receive this award than I do. Men and women like Narges Mohammadi, Nasrin Sotoudeh, Dr. Mohammad Maliki, Abdul Fattah Soltani, Mohammad Nourizad, Zia Nabavi, Atena Daemi, and many more who can be categorized as prisoner of conscience. I believe they deserve far more than I do to receive Freedom of Speech Award. The list also includes those who suffered for their religious belief in Iran. Gonabadi dervishes are the latest such victims. Dozens of them, including women, have been detained recently after a week of confrontations with security forces in Tehran. Mrs. Mahvash Sabit was imprisoned for 10 years simply for being a dedicated Baha'i. Mr. Muhammad Ali Tahiri, a mystic Sufi leader, has been in prison for more than 5 years. The case of Zahra Rahnavard, Mir Hossein Mousavi, and Hujjatul Islam Mehdi Karoubi, who have been under house arrest for 8 years without any trial, says a lot about the human rights condition in Iran. Today, 12th of June and 22nd of Hordad, marks exactly 2,674 days that they are under house arrest without any trial. The magnitude of political repression often overshadows religious persecution. Sepantan Niknam, a Zoroastrian who was elected by people of Yazd, an ancient city located in central of Iran, to represent the city's local Islamic council, was disqualified by the authorities after being elected on the ground of being a Zoroastrian. Hundreds of Baha'i students have been barred from continuing their university education after the authorities found out that they were Baha'is. The Sunni dissident catalog is even longer than Baha'is. There are restrictions even on Shiite scholars who do not share the state version of Shiism. A new dissident category is the green activists, the Iranian who care for the environment. One such group was rounded up recently and charged with espionage. One of their key figures, Kavus Sayyed Emami, a sociologist university professor, died in prison 2 months ago, and the authority stated that he had committed suicide. The lives of close relatives of many of these political victims are also repressed and sad. It does not require a great deal to imagine the life of parents whose loved one is killed in prison and they are told by the authorities to come to collect his or her body. The lives of Gohar Ishqi, the lives of Mrs. Gohar Ishqi and Mrs. Akram Niqabi, mothers of Sattar Beheshti and Saeed Zainali, whose sons were died in prison, and they never know how did they die in prison, changed forever. Mrs. Shahnaz Akmali's life also changed after her son, Mustafa Karim Begi, was shot dead during the 2009 street protest. Another example is the case of 4 students who died at the notorious Kahrizak detention center during the same protest after they were picked up by the police. There is, of course, another side to this sad and grim picture, the side which is brighter and suggests hope for the future of democracy in Iran. This brighter picture stems from observing the past history of contemporary Iran. The struggle for modern and democratic ideas emerged in Iran at the beginning of the 20th century, during the so-called constitutional revolution. It was during this time that Iranians became familiar with ideas such as rule of law, representative government, parliament, freedom of speech, equality before the law, suffragette, and other modern democratic values. Although these notions came from the secular West, many Iranians became accommodated to them and did not perceive them as being necessarily anti-Islamic. It is true that there were a small fraction of clergy and religious leaders who opposed the rising of the constitutional awakening and the ideas that it brought with it. But they failed to stop the movement. Despite the fact that the new democratic values found roots in modern Iran, particularly amongst the more educated and urbanized Iranians, the ruling political establishment since the constitutional revolution has by and large ignored these values: the rule of law, free election, checks and balances against the authorities, freedom of speech, and the rest of modern democratic ideals were grossly dismissed or forgotten during the Pahlavi era, which came to power following the constitutional revolution. There were, of course, periods when life became better for Iranians. For example, when Iran was occupied by the Allied forces during the World War II in 1941, and Reza Shah's powerful and autocratic came to an end, Iranians enjoyed a period of democracy. Political prisoners were set free. Dozens of independent newspapers were published, and there were no restrictions on political parties or political associations. Among the new political current which emerged during this period was the powerful Communist Party of Iran. After nearly 2 decades, Iranians were allowed to hold free elections. The new era, however, ended abruptly in 1953 when a right-wing pro-Western military coup engineered by Washington and London overthrew democratic government of Mohammad Mossadegh. Although the free post-Reza Shah period only lasted for 12 years, it had a long-term effect on the entire Iranian political arena. Similar to the constitutional experience, the post-Reza Shah period enhanced and revived democratic aspiration for many Iranians. Both Reza Shah and his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, during their more than half a century rule, had in many ways modernized Iranian society, of course. They brought modern education, industry, banking and transport to the country. There was similar progress in nation building, healthcare, women's rights, and their social participation, as well as equal rights for women and many other modern development. But both of them failed in political development. Both ignored the parliament, ruled autocratically as they pleased, and did not feel obliged to observe the constitution or sought any advice from any member of the ruling Iranian elite. Free elections became a thing of the past, distant memories of the constitutional era. Finally, they increasingly became intolerant towards their critique or anyone who dared to challenge their wisdom, and ruthlessly dealt with their opponent. Neither of them was even prepared to tolerate mild criticism against their policies and decisions. The human rights condition deteriorated as both rulers continued their reign. This was particularly the case under the late Shah. Whilst there were no political prisoners before the military coup in 1953, and the country enjoyed a remarkable degree of political freedom, as mentioned, the Shah pushed Iran over the next 25 years towards the closed and authoritarian state. He punished his opponent ruthlessly, and the more powerful he became, the less intolerant he was towards his even moderate critics. Only the official who praised His Majesty's ingenuity, wisdom, and great leadership surrounded the Shah. In contrast, his opponents were perceived as backwards and reactionary religious Iranians who opposed His Majesty's great leadership in leading Iran into an advanced and progressive state. In his own words, my opponents are either the reactionary clergy who are against my progressive policies, or they are communists who are agents of international conspiracy against me. He told the famous journalist Oriana Fallaci during the hotly debated interview just 3 years before the Islamic Revolution in 1979. How can any patriotic Iranian take a stand against my progressive reforms, which is shifting Iran from an underdeveloped 19th century country into a modern 20th century state? He did not realize, of course, that his fearful secret police, the Sadegh, had silenced all of the voices which could have risen against him. The number of political prisoners had risen to a peak of 5,000 before the revolution. Martin Annals, head of Amnesty International, described Iran a couple of years before the revolution as a country with the worst human rights record. It was against this background that Iranian people rose against the Shah. They demanded the release of all political detainees, free election, rule of law, freedom of speech, and other democratic ideas, which the Shah had denied them. Of course, they called for an Islamic state, similar to Islamic movement in other Islamic countries. Iranians, during the revolution, perceived that a true Islamic state would bring about all those social and political desires, all those democratic desires which the Shah's regime had failed to deliver. Similar to the constitutional revolution, Iranian intelligentsia, who led the revolution under the late Imam Khomeini, saw no conflict between Islam and modern democratic values during the revolution. We only need to go through hundreds of speeches and interviews that revolutionary leaders, religious or otherwise, made during the revolution, including the Imam Khomeini himself, to realize why Iranians rose against the Shah in the first place and what their demands were. For reasons which are beyond this speech, a strong anti-Western and anti-American influence, which was propagated by a relatively small but extremely influential Marxist movement that consisted of prominent Iranian intellectual and student leaders who at that time played an influential role in the revolutionary Iran, the Islamic leaders, including Imam Khomeini, adopted increasingly a more radical anti-American, anti-Western, and anti-capitalism stance. The new mood increased Imam Khomeini's popularity among the more revolutionary current, particularly among the important student bodies, who very much controlled the revolution. However, as the Islamic regime adopted a more radical and anti-American tune, it gradually distanced itself from the earlier democratic ideals. Anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, and anti-Westernism slogan rapidly replaced the true revolutionary mottos advocating for values such as democracy and freedom of speech. They were rapidly replaced to the great and heroic struggle between Iran and the decadent West, headed by the United States. The yearning for democratic values, however, was passed on to the younger generation Iranian, what we call the post-revolution generation. The reform movement, which emerged after the presidential elections in 1997, was an attempt to put the Islamic State back on its original democratic courses. The struggle for democracy in Iran had made small but tangible progress during the last 2 decades. While there was no independent press before the revolution and just government-owned publications, there are today at least half a dozen newspapers in Iran that can be described as independent. By the same token, there have been limited improvement in parliamentary election in comparison with the election under the Shah. Social media has been a powerful tool in assisting the course of political openness and democracy in Iran, despite the state's continued interference and pressure to curtail it. Perhaps it would not be an exaggeration to conclude that Islamic Iran is not as bleak and as dark as it seems from the outside. I tried to demonstrate in my speech that the struggle for freedom and democracy have been at the heart of the Iranian contemporary history. Many Iranians pursued democratic ideas during the past century since the constitutional revolution, and tens of thousands of Iranian men and women have spent many years behind the bar as political prisoner or prisoner of conscience, both before the Islamic Revolution and after the Islamic Revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to dedicate my Deutsche Welle Freedom of Speech Award to one such Iranian figure, Mr. Abbas Amir Intizam, who by spending 27 years in Evin after the Islamic Revolution symbolizes the struggle for democracy and freedom in modern Iran. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zibakalam, For your humility, we admire you, and for your courage, we thank you. We're now going to hear from our host, actually. We're going to be hearing from Mr. Reinhard Limburg. He is the Deputy Mayor of the city of Bonn, and as we know, Bonn is home to DW. We can't wait to hear from you. Please help me welcome Mr. Limburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Limburg, Professor Zibakalam, Mr. Baumgarten, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to congratulate Professor Zibakalam on receiving the Freedom of Speech Award. Congratulations also to the many courageous publishers, authors, journalists, scientists, politicians and activists around the world whose work addresses inequalities every day. All those who speak out against inequalities, sometimes risking personal consequences, deserve our profound respect and determined support. With that, I would like to welcome you to Bonn. Welcome to a city in the Rhineland where people from over 170 nations live peacefully together in a rich blend of cultures, religions, ages, orientations, opinions, and lifestyles. Welcome to Germany's United Nations city and hub for international debates. Ladies and gentlemen, Bonn is proud to be seen by the UN as a powerhouse for sustainable development. Our dense network of international organizations, public authorities, scientific institutions, businesses, and NGOs makes Bonn an excellent place for exchange and interaction to work on solutions for generations to come. On the local side, Bonn is a place where the SDGs are addressed in a collaborative, inclusive, and ambitious effort. In combating inequalities, our best tools are education, participation, and awareness. These can be used to develop strategies for use in tackling inequality. Fair trade and projects to better include migrants are just two examples. We also adopt this approach within our city networks, in particular with eCLAY, Local Governments for Sustainability. Our mayor, Ashok Alexander Sridharan, who was elected as the new eCLAY president on 1st of June, sends you his apologies and best wishes. Tackling inequalities is one of the most pressing challenges set by the 17 SDG goals, and the first step towards action is awareness. Thus, all of us are asked to articulate, to flag inequalities for the world to see. I admire those personalities, journalists and publicists who, in times of restrictions, oppression and persecution, refuse to keep quiet, tame the writing and clear their screens of provocation. They just don't give up. Their courage deserves our gratitude and our support, like Professor Zibakalam, who will keep on highlighting inequalities and alerting decision makers of them. We commend your fearless dedication. Let me close by thanking our generous hosts. The Global Media Forum has developed a profile as an international platform for the role and future of the media. It has become a powerful think tank and also serves as a seismograph. Thank you to Deutsche Welle, to Peter Limburg and his dedicated team for hosting this forum and for again providing a stage for courage and passion. Ladies and gentlemen, with my best wishes for tomorrow's events, I would now like to invite you to spend a pleasant evening together. Right after this award ceremony, please join me on the short walk over to Deutsche Welle and to our traditional evening reception. It will be a lovely evening with conversations, old friends, new contacts, food and drinks for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we all like the sound of food and drinks and good conversation. And speaking of, let's get some more music from Patrice before we wrap up the evening. Patrice, over to you.
Don't have to hurt. Forget who you once were. Know you're wrong to beat the song with your head against the wall. You're just too proud to make the call. Please respond. You've lost it all. I thank the Lord for making ripples in the sky. Won't just sit around and cry. We were all in an open war. Can't remember how it was before. All in an open war. Wakey, wakey, clap, boom. Wakey, wakey, clap, boom. Wakey, wakey, clap, boom. Wakey, wakey, clap, boom. On this open road, I don't know where, but we'll just go in my old red cameo. And if I find you in the dust, I'll clean you up and call the bus. We'll be home when we want to. I thank the Lord for making ripples in the sky. Won't just sit around and cry. Let's go too far, drop the pedal and we fly. Oh baby, at least we try. We were all in an open war. Can't remember how it was before. All in an open war. Wakey, wakey, clock, boom. Wakey, wakey, clock, boom. Wakey, wakey, clock, boom. Wakey, wakey, clock, boom. Never gonna learn, never gonna learn. Light up the night with the bridges I burn. Never gonna learn, never gonna learn. Light up the night with the bridges I burn. Never gonna learn, never gonna learn. Light up the night with the bridges I burn. Never gonna learn, never gonna learn. Light up the night with the bridges I burn. Born in an open war. Can't remember how it was before. Born in an open war. born in an open world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrice. And that lovely song brings us to the end of our program this evening. We'll be calling Mr. Limburg and Mr. Zibakalam to just come up here to take a family photo later on. But for the rest of you, this means it's time for food, drink, and good conversation. Thank you for your time. Enjoy your evening.
At the end of December 2017, Iran saw its biggest anti-government demonstrations in almost a decade. At the end of December 2017, Iran saw its biggest anti-government demonstrations in almost a decade.